Welcome back, everyone. And now for our next session this afternoon, which is engineering a more sustainable culinary destination. And speaking with us today is Chantal Cooke, who is the owner of Panpathic Communications and also the Passion for the Planet radio station based in the UK. Chantal has spoken at our events on numerous occasions. She's a very popular speaker and definitely is very experienced in the area of sustainability and also healthy diets, special diets, and so on. And we approached Chantal and asked her if she would be interested in sharing her knowledge and experience about applying the messages of sustainability to what's happening now with the kind of the post-COVID era.
Okay, cool. Maybe one day we'll get there. Don't you just love tech? So hopefully you can hear me and you can see the slides that Eric is sharing. That's the bit I'm hoping. And on that basis, I'm getting a few chats saying that yes, you can hear me and yes, you can see. So I'm gonna start. Obviously, if there's any problems or whatever, please pop it in the chat and then we can hopefully deal with it. So thank you very much for joining me today. As Eric mentioned, I'll be talking about engineering a more sustainable culinary destination. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself first of all, just to kind of get started, just so that you kind of know where I'm coming from. Sustainability is something that I've been really passionate about for a long time. I spent over 25 years as a journalist covering sustainability stories, long before it was a thing to cover. As Eric mentioned, I co-founded the UK's first sustainability-focused radio station, Passion for the Planet. And then I've taken those skills and knowledge to help food service businesses be more sustainable, and very importantly, actually to help them promote what they're doing so that they can use sustainability as a way to boost business and increase profit as well. So it's not just, the right thing to do, it's actually a good thing for business. But the trouble with sustainability is it's often a very overused kind of word. It can mean so many different things to different people. Some people use it as a way of greenwashing, others use it sort of way too vague. Heads around what sustainability is and what it should be, because I said it's a very overused term. So in its broadest sense, sustainability refers to the ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time. In business and policy context, sustainability seeks to prevent the depletion of natural or physical resources so that they'll remain available for the long term. So in other words, it means doing things that don't damage the future. That's the short version. Or if you want to put it this way more neatly, sustainable activities are those that meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think if we can think about sustainability in that terms, in terms of, yes, we need to meet our needs, but we mustn't compromise the needs of future generations, then I think that's quite actually a good way of holding the sustainability definition in your head. So to be truly sustainable as a restaurant or a food service venue or as a destination or whatever, you need to be you all need to be sustainable together. So if you're a food service venue, you also need to be sustainable and in a sustainable destination. And if you're a destination that wants to be sustainable, then you have to have sustainable businesses and sustainable infrastructures. The two go hand in hand. That said, they don't necessarily happen at the same time. In fact, generally speaking, they don't happen at the same time or in tandem. There's usually a pioneer who kind of gets the sustainability started, either within their sector locally or within their destination, and then everybody else kind of follows suit. So whether it's a restaurant that starts it off and people follow, or a hotel, or whether it's a pioneer within the destination tourism team, for example, that starts it and then kind of kicks it off and everyone follows, there is usually this kind of somebody starts and everybody else sort of follows. And the advantage of being the one that starts is that you tend to reap the most benefits. So you get the first mover advantage, you get the PR benefit, you get the name recognition, you have your unique selling proposition, and of course that means you attract more people. So next slide. So let's use a couple of examples. Copenhagen in Denmark. Anyway, so let's take Copenhagen in Denmark. So Copenhagen, I think, really owns the sustainable city space in Europe. Yes, others have followed suit, and there are some other cities in Europe doing really, really well. But I think Copenhagen has definitely owned that space because it did it right at the beginning, before it was something that was, you know, the thing to do, if you like. So I remember visiting Copenhagen about 9 years ago, specifically to look at their sustainability sort of stuff, if you want to call it that. And there was a lot to see, and it was fascinating to see it. And they really, I said, they really owned that space. They kind of went, this is what we're doing. We're going to shout about it. We're going to share it. And they still hold that top spot in Europe. Another country that's done really, really well with that is Costa Rica. So this is an entire country known for its biodiversity and its commitment to eco or green tourism. And when people talk about sustainable destinations, Costa Rica is someone that always gets mentioned, and it makes you want to visit, particularly as well because, I mean, partly because it's interesting, partly because of course Costa Rica is beautiful, but also because being sustainable gives you the impression that the place must be beautiful, it must be lovely, it must be a nice place to visit. It's not going to be ugly and grey, it's not going to be covered in litter. It's going to be a sort of, yeah, a luxurious sort of place to visit in its own sense. And so that's why, again, being able to market yourself as sustainable actually just makes you that bit more attractive. So again, Costa Rica has been doing this a long time, and they still hold the top spot, I think, as a sustainable country destination rather than, say, a city destination. Now, it's true that when I visited those countries sort of 8-9 years ago, I was probably one of only a few people choosing those places, choosing Copenhagen and Costa Rica, because they were sustainable. But in that decade, a lot has changed. People are now looking for sustainable destinations. If you look for Google searches, you'll see it's a huge search term for sustainable destinations. If you do a Google search, you will see masses of publications, you know, press publications listing the top sustainable destinations. They're doing that because that's what people want to read. If they didn't want to read it, they wouldn't write it. So if you can see that that's what they're doing, that means that actually you kind of need to be on that bandwagon as well, if you want to call it that. And new research is also backing up that travelers now want to go to places that are sustainable. And I know that for me, when I travel, I actively look for destinations, for places to stay, places to eat, things to measure, things to visit that are making genuine, measurable and concerted efforts to be planet friendly. I, like a lot of people, and probably like a lot of you, I want my money to do more than just create profit. I want it to do some good for the community. I want it to pull people out of poverty. I want it to help educate children. I want it to preserve local habitats. I want it to protect endangered species. And I think all of us would like to see our money doing more than just giving us the product or experience and adding to profit. There's nothing wrong with making a profit. I have no problem with spending my money with a business and then making a profit. That's what business is about. That's how we all live. But I'd like it to do just that little bit more as well. Okay, so next slide then. So hopefully I've convinced you that being sustainable is kind of the right thing to do. Then really the issue is, how do you go about being sustainable? What is it that you do in order to be more sustainable? Well, I would say the thing to do, first of all, is to start with where you are now. So what is it that you've already done? What changes have you already made? Is it simply that you've even just removed plastic straws, or you're no longer selling plastic bottles or something? Or have you installed a water fountain to help people top up their bottles? Or have you added some meat-free options to your menu? So look at where you are now. That's the very first thing to do. Give yourself a pat on the back because you've done something, and those changes do make a difference. And then the next thing is to think about, okay, what else could I do? And I would always start with the easy things. So don't look at there and go, I could do this really big thing that's going to cost a huge amount of money and blah, 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 and it's going to make a massive difference, because maybe that's just too big in the beginning. I would definitely go with the little changes first. I'm going to run through some suggestions. So let's start with, if you're a food service business, rather than if you're, say, a destination. We'll do destinations, talk about destinations in a second, but as a food service business. So first of all, I'd look at your food waste. Can you reduce your food waste? Can you create new dishes rather than throw food away? Like, for example, a Kindling restaurant in Brighton, they create some really delicious cakes using fruit and vegetable that's just a little bit past its best date, like you wouldn't want to serve it as it is, kind of thing. But whether it's banana bread or courgette cake or beetroot and red velvet cake, these are ways of using vegetables that are perhaps past their best in terms of putting them into a salad or something, but actually would work really, really well in a cake. Sorry, the next slide as well, please. Also, make soups. You've got any leftover food or vegetables or whatever, make a soup out of it. In our house, we make soup out of pretty much anything. And okay, we can't repeat it the next day, but that can become a feature of these kind of soups that are always, the surprise soup or the soup that's different every week or something. But it's a way of using up food waste. Can you repurpose yesterday's meal into a one-off special for today, for example? Is that possible? Again, at Kindling Restaurant in Brighton, they actually make a feature out of this rather than trying to hide the fact that they're, sort of repurposing meals. Also think about what you buy, how you use it, and then how you store it. So, fresh herbs and spices, can they actually be frozen? And then you could use them rather than them kind of wilting and going off or something like that. Another idea might be to offer 2 portion sizes. So for the hungry eaters, a big plate, and for those not wanting too much, a small plate. That too can reduce the food that's left on the plate and therefore the food that you end up putting in the bin. And can you donate any leftover meals that can't be sold? So for example, Pret a Manger in London do this. So they're sandwiches that are not sold at the end of the day, rather than going to waste, they donate them to, for example, to local homeless shelters. Look at single-use items like straws, plastic cutlery, takeaway boxes, drinks in plastic bottles. Can you eliminate these? Can you find recyclable or home compostable, not commercial compostable alternatives, because that doesn't generally happen, but home compostable alternatives? Because for every swap you make, you are really starting to make a difference. And let me give you an example of that. So Norwegian Cruise Lines, they announced a while ago that they were eliminating all their single-use straws. And I have to be honest, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, big deal. Think about all the things that cruise lines do that aren't particularly environmentally friendly. Eliminating their single-use straws feels like a bit of a, pardon the pun, drop in the ocean. However, I then found out that across their entire fleet, which is about 26 cruise ships, they used 50 million plastic straws, single-use plastic straws every year. Now, if you do quick maths on that, on the average weight of a plastic straw, that actually comes out at 20 million tons of single-use plastic that they used and threw away every single year. 20 million tons. So although I get it that you might not be using 50 million plastic straws every year, you probably do use a lot of plastic straws and other single-use items in the course of your business kind of working life. So you imagine if you change even just one thing, what a massive difference that can make. So, okay, that's a huge company. In fact, the 3rd biggest cruise company in the world, not the biggest, only the 3rd biggest. And look at what a difference that one thing that they did, how much of a difference that actually made. And that wasn't that big a deal, really, just changing your straws, either making them straws that you rewash and reuse, like the metal straws, or replacing them with paper straws that can be disposed of properly. So I said, just think about those things that you can do that will make even what may appear to be a small difference, but actually those small differences add up. Let's also think about your menu's carbon emissions. So we know that we have to reduce our CO2 emissions. So let's think about your menu when it comes to reducing your business's CO2 emissions. And one of the simplest and best, in terms of it makes the biggest impact, thing that you can do is to increase the number, so decrease the amount of meat options you have, and in return, increase the number of vegetarian or better still vegan options. So I'm not saying you have to ditch all the meat on your menu. Yes, that would make you more sustainable and it would considerably reduce your carbon emissions. But let's be realistic, probably not going to happen. So if you could actually just reduce the amount of meat that you have on your menu and increase the amount of vegetarian and vegan options, then you will definitely reduce your carbon emissions. And this is because livestock farming is the single biggest source of global greenhouse gas emissions. Livestock farming produces more CO2 into the atmosphere than the entire transport industry. It is also 5 times as big as the total number of CO2 emissions from flights. So often we get quite sort of worried about, should we be flying, and can we really maintain tourism if flying is going to be so bad for the environment? And I'm not saying that it's not bad for the environment, but if you think about the single thing that we could do that makes the number of flights we take, particularly tourism flights, pale into insignificance, it's actually reducing the amount of meat. So if you could bring the tourists over but get them to eat a little bit less meat, then you're kind of balancing it out a bit. Also, livestock production is the single biggest source of deforestation in the Amazon. So as a result of the clearance of Amazon rainforests in order to make areas to grow fodder crops in order to feed animals, the Amazon rainforest is now actually a net emitter of carbon rather than a net absorber. And that's a really sad change in the situation. And it's purely, wholly down to our obsession with eating meat. We have to reduce the amount of meat we eat. So if you can give your guests and so on a really tasty alternative without meat in it, then that will make a huge difference. And if you think for a moment that 60% of all mammals on the planet are livestock reared for human consumption, 60%, 36% of mammals on the planet are us, humans, and just 4% of the mammals on the planet are wild. So if we could reduce those levels a little bit, perhaps bring down the livestock and bring up the wild, imagine what a better world we'd live in, but also imagine how that might benefit tourism as well and bring people to your country to see that wildlife or those beautiful habitats and so on. So if you can, reduce the amount of meat on the menu and increase the amount of vegetables. And perhaps another way of doing it, if you don't feel that you're able to completely take the meat off the menu, maybe what you do is you make the meat portion of the meal smaller, but give them extra vegetables to kind of boost it out. Or sort of say you get a free plate, you can always say it that way, of say a vegan dish on the side as an extra thing, or to introduce them to a new type of food. So definitely that's one way in which you can reduce your CO2 emissions and increase your sustainability. Another is to look at energy. So look at your energy use. Can you actually reduce the amount of energy that you use? For example, can you remove outside heaters, perhaps offer people blankets instead? Can you prevent drafts in your restaurant if that's one of the things that's maybe getting people a bit chilly or something like that? Can you use water fountains if you've got say an outside seating area or something, and that will cool the air rather than using air conditioning? And of course, for the energy that you do have to use, because it's unlikely that you can go completely energy free, then see how much of that energy could come from renewable sources. And there are lots of opportunities for that. Next, I would aim for being net zero. And once you've reached net zero in terms of your carbon emissions, then you want to be carbon negative. So obviously, there are some ways we've already talked about to reduce your carbon emissions, so meat being one of those, using renewable energy being another one. But equally, if you can't get rid of your carbon emissions completely, which let's face it, is going to be fairly difficult, then you need to think about offsetting, whether that's planting trees, teaming up with a charity, choosing net zero suppliers, or using a form of direct air capture. For example, there are companies now which will direct air capture the carbon out of the atmosphere on your behalf. And the prices for that are coming down quite considerably. So it's definitely something that's very doable these days. Next one as well would be, or the final one of this particular section, is talk to your suppliers. So see if you can find net zero suppliers, or suppliers with a better ethics or a better sustainability rating or something. Speak to them, try and encourage them if they're not brilliant yet. Find out what they're doing and encourage them to be better. Find out, what chemicals does your laundry company use? Does your grocer really, genuinely source their fruit, veg and meat from locally? And what does that mean? Is the meat free range? Does it come from regenerative agriculture, for example? Is it organic? If you're buying tableware, look for companies that use natural products. Look for things that are compostable or recyclable. So in other words, look, it's not just what you're doing, it's the products that you're buying and the suppliers that you're working with. So I know you probably feel a little bit like, oh, that's a lot, but don't think that way. Think of it as there's lots and lots of opportunities for you to do things that will make you more sustainable. And I said, start with the easy stuff. Don't start with the difficult stuff or the stuff that kind of makes you go, Urgh. Start with the easy stuff. Do that and then do the next and then do the next. And you will see that it will layer up, because the best changes that we can make are the changes that we actually do, not the changes, however big they are, that we think about. So let's do the changes. So next slide. Destinations. So I talked about food service businesses. Now let's talk about destinations for a moment, because as I mentioned before, the two have to come kind of hand in hand. So as a destination, you need to be supporting your local tourism businesses and your food service businesses that are making steps to being more sustainable. And yes, support can be money, and I know they would all like money, wouldn't we all? But it doesn't have to always be about cash. There are lots of other ways of supporting those businesses locally. So it can be publicising them, it can be helping them increase their numbers of tourists coming through the doors in the off season, for example, because that in itself is a step to being towards being more sustainable and reducing the negative impact of some tourism activities. Create a sustainability page on your website for the consumers, highlight the sustainable places, showcases the places offering vegan food, for example. Maybe create an off the beaten track green tour encompassing some of the local businesses that are showing best practice. Send out press releases to journalists showcasing how sustainable your destination is, highlight some of the best, say what you've achieved so far and what your plans are. Run workshops to train them, bring in experts to share knowledge, for example. So Thessaloniki in Greece recently ran a day teaching local restaurants how to add more vegan options. It wasn't about getting rid of the meat, it was just about adding more vegan options to give them that opportunity. And that was a huge success and has now made Thessaloniki one of the best places in Greece for vegan food. So champion those businesses. You know, Copenhagen, I talked about earlier, in the last decade, they've seen a 74% increase in visitors. And they recently launched a Tourism for Good campaign with sustainability at its core. Costa Rica has seen a steady year-on-year increase in tourists, an increase in the number of tourists, the number of nights they stay, and the contribution that tourism is making to the economy as well. So there is a lot of benefits. You can also help create vegan or green tours of the city. So Ljubljana in Slovenia has really embraced this, and they have made some of their green or sustainability tours the must-do activities when you visit the city. So that green and sustainable and vegan and so on can be really good hooks for a new type of tour, and you can combine that tour with some of the big sites, sure, and then weave in meeting those sustainable champions, telling those local stories of how, you know, you used to do this but now you're doing it so much better, you know, how the river used to be full of whatever rubbish or something but now it's really clean. You know, those are stories people like to hear, and they can go underneath that one kind of green umbrella, because people will spend money to be sustainable. They will do that. It's not just a nice thing, it's actually something that people are actively looking for and will pay a bit more for as well. On top of that, you also have to ensure that the infrastructure is there. So you need to make sure that there are facilities for recycling, that the recycling is collected, that there are bins, that there are water fountains for people to fill up their bottles, there are scooters or bicycles to hire. And if the infrastructure is poor in your destination, then this is an opportunity to lobby for change. Create a campaign to show how having a much better sustainable infrastructure will benefit local businesses and people. And this is a way of positioning you and your destination as visionary, as kind of leading the charge. And definitely publicize what you have. So everything you've got that you've done and that is sustainable, make sure people know about it, and make sure it's easy for them to find. In fact, make sure it's right in front of the traveller, not that they have to ask for it or have to hunt it out, but actually it's almost like it's one of the first things you tell them. Shout about it on social media, create videos, interview some of the trailblazers, showcase the best vegan food options. And really importantly, what you need to do as a destination working in that office and that tourism office is you must educate yourself about who those people are so that you know who you're pushing. So for example, Bristol in England and Berlin in Germany have tourism offices that have really embraced this concept, and they have got a whole sort of sustainability and vegan packages, and as a result of that they have become known as the sustainable and vegan capitals of their respective countries. So they've managed to position themselves as something quite unique because those tourism offices have A, embraced it, and B, educated themselves so that they're able to promote it. Another thing I would suggest as well is that you think, and this applies to both food service and destinations, is that you think about making sustainability, if you like, the event in itself, the reason for being there. So it's not just something else that you do, but it is a thing. Now, I've mentioned already Ljubljana, Copenhagen, Montreal is another good example where they're offering tours specifically. In other words, they've made green sustainable the thing that you do in Montreal, and you can go around and see the green shops, the best sustainable restaurants, and even some of the best buildings in the city that have got sustainability at their heart. And it's kind of a way as a tourist of feeling a bit like going behind the scenes, getting something a bit different. So that one works really well. So run workshops, help local businesses understand some of the actions that they can take, maybe help them create sustainable cooking classes or something like that, either trade ones, as in for the food service businesses, or even for the tourists coming in. And also show how you're preserving culinary cultures in a way that also makes them sustainable. And you can adapt kind of old practices to make them green for the 21st century. And that brings me on to traditions. Don't be afraid to play with so-called traditions. So traditions change all the time. There is pretty much nothing that has been around forever that's a tradition. So if we think about women's role in society, the food items we eat. So for example, in England, swan was a delicacy. That was a real tradition. You ate swan at big events in the 16th century. Today, no one would dream of eating swan in the UK. So that's a tradition that's gone. It was a tradition to own slaves and servants. That tradition has gone. We used to traditionally, it would send children down mines or up chimneys to do really dangerous jobs. We don't do that anymore, thankfully. It was tradition to go to church every Sunday, to fast for Lent. It was tradition that women wore long dresses that covered up their ankles. The list of traditions is endless, and they have all since changed as a result. So yes, I think it is really important to preserve skills and knowledge, but we need to update these so-called traditions to suit the modern era and to ensure that they are not damaging our planet or our people for the future generations. So basically, be prepared to play with traditions. Also, be transparent. This is more important than ever. We live in a very low trust society. So be open and transparent about what you can and can't do, what you're already doing, what is planned. Explain to people what you're doing. So for example, our napkins aren't pure white because we don't use bleach in our laundry. A really good example I saw of this was actually in Costa Rica. I was staying at a lovely hotel in Pura Vida, and there was a little note saying that there were no hair dryers in the room and that the sheets weren't ironed. And that's why the sheets were a little bit kind of crinkly. And the reason for that is because they use renewable energy, and the renewable energy couldn't cope with the huge draw that ironing and hair dryers would take upon the system that was providing them with the energy. And so I actually felt really impressed and excited by that, and really pleased that I was making a contribution by not worrying about a few wrinkles in my bed sheets and not drying my hair with a hairdryer. That was one of those positive kind of feel good things, rather than looking at it and going, why haven't I got a hairdryer? Why are the sheets a bit wrinkly? Another thing to do is to look for recognised accreditation schemes. So whether that's an accreditation for being organic or cruelty free or vegan society approved or being B Corp certified, for example. These accreditation schemes can really help you, get a focus on what to do and have a sort of a system to go through to achieve it, but also it can be good publicity and can give consumers trust in the fact that some of the things you say you're doing, you are really doing. And finally, I'd also suggest collaborating. So team up with other attractions locally, create a hub or print a leaflet of sustainable activities, or create a self-guided tour of all the people doing something sustainable locally. Work with your suppliers and help them integrate more sustainable practices. Basically, lead by example, and share what you've learned with other people so that they can also do it. And then team up with events or attractions locally who are being sustainable, and maybe kind of create a theme or a package together or something. So, it could be a special themed meal that they have after visiting this particular place, or with this kind of sustainability sort of package on the top of it. Okay, last slide, or last but one slide, I think, actually. So next slide. So finally, this is my last real point, is publicity. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of telling everyone in every way about everything sustainable that you are doing. Doing sustainable things is the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do, no question about that. But if you really want to make the biggest amount of difference, and you want to make sure that obviously it helps boost your business, build your business, increase the number of people that come to your business or your destination, and obviously ultimately increase your profits, then you have to let people know. There is no point doing this stuff and not telling them. So make sure you shout about it, and make sure things like having a vegan menu, for example, you don't do that ridiculous thing, which I've seen some places do, where there's a separate vegan menu that I have to ask for. People don't know to ask for stuff. They don't know what they don't know. So whatever it is you've got, whether it's vegan food or not ironing the sheets because of renewable energy, whatever it is, make sure that people know it, that you've got it right in front of their face so they cannot miss it and they don't have to go out searching for it. If I think a restaurant is not going to cater to me because they don't make it obvious, I will go somewhere else. And I'm not alone in that. Everyone will do that, whatever their food preferences are. So really, really shout about it. Do PR, so send out press releases, perhaps organise press trips to bring journalists into your destination or into your business and so on, to write about it and promote it. Obviously shout about it on social media, make sure it's really clear on your website, write articles and blogs about sustainability. If you're buying advertising space, then include your sustainability credentials in those adverts that you're doing, and even consider entering some sustainability awards, which will give you some nice kudos for the efforts that you're making in doing the right thing and helping us be more sustainable and protect our destinations and ourselves and our planet and everything else for generations ahead of us. But so basically what I'm saying is, whatever you do, don't hide it, make it really clear and make it easy for people to find. So the last slide, what I want you to take away and just remember is that sustainability isn't just good for the planet. It is good for the planet, but it's not just that. It's good for people, it's good for future generations, that's our children and our grandchildren going on, but it's also really, really good for your business. So I really hope that I've managed to persuade you that sustainability is something that you should be taking seriously, that it is good for business. And I hope that I've given you some ideas of how to go about that. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you've got. And of course, I can easily be contacted if there's something you think of later or you'd like some help with your sustainability or with promoting what you're doing sustainably. So I'd like to open up the chat now to any questions. Please do fire away.
Thank you, Chantal. I'm going to put your contact information in the chat for people and give them a chance to put some questions there in the Q&A. So one of the things that I really liked what you were talking about was to basically embrace a new culinary tradition. And you gave all these examples of past traditions that we no longer do. You know, we don't eat swan anymore. And it reminded me of another person I heard at a conference once who said that cuisines change every 80 years anyway. So the food that we're eating today is not the food that our grandparents ate, and that we should not be scared to have these changes come our way. So whether it's vegan and vegetarian, or like what happened to chocolate mousse? When I was a little boy, we used to have chocolate mousse all the time. Now you don't see chocolate mousse anymore, right? So why is that? It's not like it was a controversial thing, but what would you say to countries like Spain and Argentina that are so meat centric? And there are vegan options here, but I was talking to someone in North America and she said, well, I can't eat cow dairy and I'm also vegan. I said, well, Spain is not the country for you for vegan. But we do alternative milks really well here. So you can get goat's milk cheese and different things like that. But what would you recommend to a destination like Spain, which is also extremely traditional and kind of old fashioned, but you know, there are meat-free dishes?
Well, I think that's the thing, is there are already meat-free dishes. So patatas bravas, for example, a lot of tapas is actually meat-free already. We make, and I've had in Spain, some fantastic vegetarian paella, for example. So whatever region of the country you're in, there is probably already something that's meat-free to begin with. And maybe it's just a case of bringing that out of the closet and making it kind of more obvious, making it more of a thing. But then the other thing is just to think about, what could you replace? Can you do an option? So for example, well, actually paella is a good example, actually. Traditionally has meat or fish or something in it, but on the other hand, it's actually very easy to take the meat and fish out and replace it with vegetables. So we put, you know, peppers and olives and courgette and artichoke and all sorts of things in it, and it tastes fabulous, you know. Fennel tastes really good in there as well. So there, I think it's partly look at what's already there and just make more of what's already there, but also look at some of those dishes and go, well, what could I replace? And sometimes it might be about replacing it with, if you like, a meat substitute, whatever that might be, whether that's a tofu or something like that. Or it might just be, instead, just putting more veggies in, or lentils. So if you make, so this is obviously not a Spanish example, but if you make, say, a moussaka, I've had some fantastic moussakas made with green lentils rather than with mincemeat. Essentially, there's not a lot of difference, really, because the meat is not the big flavour in a moussaka. It's the herbs and spices and the sauce and so on. So I think I bet you, in fact, I know for a fact, and Argentina is the same, there are plenty of meat-free options around. It's just that we are kind of in this thing of, oh, people want meat. And that was probably true in the past. I think that was true in the past, but it's not true right now. And then also, you think about how, as you said, how much cuisine has changed. Certainly in the UK, it very much used to be meat and 2 veg. We didn't eat anything else. We ate meat and 2 veg. And now we eat all sorts of different things. And, there's this amazing fusion of different cultures coming together and making foods that are something almost brand new. So, if you love food, then I'm quite sure you're creative. And if you've got a chef that works, then I'm sure he or she is creative. Use that as an opportunity to come up with something that's maybe a signature dish, something that becomes your special thing that you then promote. You're the pioneer in that. So I honestly think it's about lack of effort to look and lack of imagination, because with a little bit of effort and a little bit of imagination, this is not a problem that's difficult.
Yeah. The theme of the conference is culinary travel in a post-COVID era. So in the past 2.5 years, how have you seen both destinations and businesses changing their products, their services, their promotions to suit the new consumer values now?
I think there's now this kind of move almost that if they're not talking about sustainability, they do feel a little bit like they're losing out, sort of thing. Yeah. So I've seen it certainly during the pandemic. I think we all kind of woke up to how different the world could be, but also to our health. That I think was the biggest shift, was our understanding and focus on our well-being. But of course, if you're focusing on your own personal well-being, you kind of have to focus on the well-being of the planet at the same time. You can't do those two things independently. And I think we realize that. So I have most definitely seen destinations and individual businesses, but actually more destinations really, I think, embracing sustainability and trying to put themselves forward as a sustainable destination. Some better than others, but I think there is definitely a good move in that direction.
That's one reason why we partnered with Eco Foodies in Madrid to offer green certifications for food service businesses. And it's really certification that has staying power. So rather than just, like you said, greenwashing before, there's an actual checklist, and they have two levels of certification, kind of the light and then the formal one. And even the light one is quite strict. And it's like a culinary capital certification. It's actually strict when destinations get the application, they're really, you want me to complete this? Well, yes, you have to qualify for it. There's some work that goes into it.
And I think that is actually very important, because the trouble is there's been plenty of accreditation schemes where literally you fill in a form, tick a couple of boxes, job done. And that may have worked in the past, but we live in such a low trust society now, that it's almost constantly that thing of, well, do I believe it or not? So it is really important to look for accreditation schemes and awards that really do kind of push you. They're the ones that are going to make the biggest difference, and they're the ones to be proud of as well. And they're the ones where you're safe. So if there's a scheme in the UK, for example, called Red Tractor, which is supposed to be about animal welfare, every week virtually there's another news story about how some Red Tractor certified farm has been abusing its animals in horrific ways. Well, no one now wants to be a Red Tractor certified farm, because actually it says all the wrong things about you. So you want to make sure that you are choosing the right types of accreditation. And I do appreciate that can be difficult, but often the toughness of it and how it's policed, those are the two things that will give you the kind of information about which ones to choose.
I think it's this kind of 2-year downtime that has given us and given some of the businesses we partner with and given the industry a chance to really kind of catch our breath and say, okay, now we can start to do things differently. Someone has written in, first of all, they thanked you. They said this is a very useful presentation. Is there a checklist or other tool that a company can use to measure or score themselves for sustainable practices to help see where we are now and where we need to improve?
There's no kind of single recognized one really, although B Corp is a good one. So if you went to B Corp and it is literally BCORP, then that is quite a tough one to go through. And there are lots and lots of elements to it. So that's a good place to start. And even if you didn't want to become B Corp certified, then that would be a good place to at least look at what they would ask of you, and then you can kind of work your way through. Obviously, it does depend on it's a little bit different for every business. So there isn't this kind of catch-all that works for everybody. I think, you know, even if you just took some of the things that were in the presentation today and worked your way through, you would be making a really, really good start. But I said, apart from that, then I think the first place I would look would be B Corp.
Yeah, and that is a very hard one to qualify for as well, but it's worthwhile if you can do it. Yeah. Now, Chantal, I forgot to introduce you as the co-chair of our sustainability practice area, which is, we've introduced 6 new practice areas in our association this year. And maybe you'd just like to kind of wrap up and share with people what the mission of the sustainability practice area is and some of the activities that you hope to release in the next 6 to 12 months, as you know, because of our practice area. Sure.
So what we want to do is we want to basically obviously make the World Food Travel Association itself more sustainable and have sustainability absolutely at its core. I know that's been something we've always wanted to do, but this is about really checking in and making sure that we're doing it and kind of having a real focus for it. But it's not just about us, it's about helping our members as well. So we want to be able to produce something a little bit like you were asking for in a way, which is, you know, how can you be more sustainable? What can I do to make my business more sustainable? How can I be educated and understanding the differences that it will make? So the sustainability practice area is about pulling all of that expertise together in order to help us and to help you, so that we're helping, everybody's being helped basically to be more sustainable. So there are, I think it's 6 pillars within there, and it covers both the environment, but it also covers, so it covers people, the environment, but it also covers people and the way in which tourism money is spent within an economy and things like that. So it's not just about are we green and reducing our carbon emissions. Sustainability, as I said right at the beginning of the talk, is about the actions that we take today that help us but don't damage the future. And that's really what it's about. And of course, that's not just about our carbon emissions or the amount of meat we eat. It is also about how we treat the people, how we look at over tourism in destinations, how we maybe spread the tourism load, how we ensure that tourism money trickles down to the people that really need it. It's all of those kind of things. So sustainability in its absolute broadest sense. And that's the kind of areas that we're talking about, not just sustainability in its an environmental sense.
Yeah. We published a couple of documents. One was a 10-step guide to destination sustainability, and then we also have a guide to food service sustainability. And it's not on our website right now, but I'll make sure that delegates of the conference get copies of that. I was just looking for the links and I couldn't find them easily. So I'll make sure, Beth, you were asking about that. I think you would find those interesting. And it's not an official checklist, but I think it'll certainly help you go in the right direction there. So we need to go ahead, Chantal.
I was going to say, and when we publish obviously the sustainability practice area sort of pillars, as it were, then that will also help. And just quickly, those pillars are your environmental operations. So that's very much the green, if you want to say the eco-friendly bit. There's a business's involvement in the local community. So is it creating employment, education, etc., donating? Is it thinking about the well-being of people? There's obviously education and training. So are you actually educating your staff and kind of helping them to lift themselves up? Then there's creating quality experience and therefore sort of bringing people back to the area because of that sort of word of mouth and wanting to go back to experience it again. And then, of course, there's equality, diversity and well-being. So are you ensuring that, equality and diversity and well-being is recognised in all areas? So those are the 5 main pillars that we're looking at through in the sustainability practice area.
And we also introduced a sustainability pillar in our Culinary Capitals program this year. So we modified the program. Before there were 4 pillars, and then in January we introduced a 5th pillar, which was culinary sustainability. So it is working its way into pretty much everything we do. Yeah. Oh, Chantal, thank you. It's always a pleasure. You are just a wealth of knowledge. Every time you speak, I learn something new. And even despite all of the multiple cutouts of my 4G service, which is actually today was worse than your 4G service, my goodness.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyway, but again, I really appreciate your time and your knowledge sharing. And thank you again.
Pleasure. Thank you ever so much. Look forward to speaking to you all later. Bye-bye.
Lovely. And we will now move over into the next session. So go ahead and move into the next room, and we will see you all over there in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.